Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. So John Ryder has decided to call it a day. This comes on the back of his defeat by Jaime Munguia, where he got knocked out in 9 rounds, stopped in 9 rounds. And he announced his retirement today. He's 35 years old and he finishes with a record of 32 wins with 18 KOs, 7 defeats, 2 of which were inside the distance. And he's decided to walk off into the sunset, having made some decent money, having had a career where you could say he's overachieved. I mean, this is a guy who held a couple of interim belts, WBO and WBC, I think. A couple of those, silver, intercontinental, international belts. Never won the British title, even though he fought for it twice, got beaten twice. Never held the European or the Commonwealth either, but 2-time world title challenger. I definitely thought he beat Callum Smith in their super middleweight title fight a few years back. Went the distance with Canelo. This is a guy, as he said, I'm just a kid from Islington. Look at what I've achieved, and he does walk off with a lot of money in the bank, which is great to see any fighter do that. A lot don't. A lot give everything, end up walking on the heels, slurring the words. But they don't actually have anything to show for it. Well, John Ryder, he turned pro in 2010. For the first couple of years of his career, he fought nothing but journeymen. And he kind of, I suppose, 2013, he started to fight a couple of decent guys. He was the first man to beat Eamon O'Kane, who at the time was 8-0. He stopped him in 8 rounds. And he had a couple of wins against people like Luke Robinson, Sandor Mixo, I think the guy's name was. I had a look at John's box rec before I started this video, so I remember vaguely a few of these fights, and they were against those, fighters with sort of 8-1 records, 9-2, 10-2, that sort of thing. But he was still untested when he fought for the British and Commonwealth titles against Billy Joe Saunders. That was in 2013, so 11 years ago. I mean, it's a long time ago. And Saunders was undefeated, 18-0. And, John gave him a good fight. I mean, Saunders at the time, even though these were for the middleweight belts, Saunders he's always boxed above his weight. Like, really, he was just a super welterweight back then. And when he was a super middleweight, he was really just a middleweight. He just lacks discipline, Saunders. But Ryder gave him plenty to think about. And at the time, Ryder was an Eddie Hearn or Matchroom fighter, and he went over to fight Saunders on a Queensbury promotion. He got well paid for it. But he didn't win the title. He lost it by a couple of points, 2, 3, 4 points. Very, very various close cards. All 3 of them were close, but it was a unanimous decision loss. He then came back, sort of rebuilt against pretty much nondescript opposition, and he did win. I think it was a WBO Intercontinental belt, but he was after that British title. And in fact, he got his second bite of the British title cherry against Nick Blackwell. And to everyone's surprise, absolutely my surprise anyway, he got stopped by Nick Blackwell in 7 rounds. And he was never on the floor. And in fact, I think, if memory serves, I think he was winning the fight, not by much. But Blackwell just sort of exploded into action, badly shook John. John sort of tottered back, and Blackwell was putting it on him. And he was in the ascendancy, no doubt. And the referee stopped it. And some people said that was a premature stoppage. But, it kind of looked like at the time that John had sort of petered out and maybe found his level. And this was reiterated when 4 fights later, he lost on points to Jack Arnfield. And Arnfield was 20-2 at the time. And again, this was at middleweight. John had sort of previously flirted with super middleweight, but had gone back down to 160, I think. That Arnfield fight was at middleweight, I think. And then he fought Adam Etches, who at the time was 20-1. That was in his next fight. He won a unanimous 12-round decision. Then he lost a split to Rocky Fielding. So he's now at the point where he's domestic level. He's winning one, losing one. And the split decision loss to Rocky Fielding was for the vacant super middleweight British title. So he's had 3 bites at the British title cherry at different weights, and he's lost all 3. But then he sort of went down the road of, all right, I'm going to be a gatekeeper. His attitude seemed to me, just give me whatever you got. The biggest money. Just send me where the biggest money is. So he went over to. In fact, no, actually, I think they brought Nielsen over to Britain because I think it was at Wembley. But he fought Patrick Nielsen, who at the time was 29 wins, 1 defeat. And Nielsen was down in the 2nd and the 5th and got stopped in the 5th. And that was a real surprise at the time because Patrick Nielsen, again, a glossy record. They did bring him over here, but I think he was still very much a favourite to beat John. And then John backed that up with a 2-round knockout win over Jamie Cox. And Jamie Cox at the time had only lost to George Groves. He had 25 wins and 1 defeat. So you're talking about a guy who's now got 2 pretty good wins under his belt. He then fought an undefeated fighter, Andrei Sirotkin, and he knocked him out in 7. I think it was a TKO in 7 maybe. So that's 3 on the bounce. And suddenly John is winning some fights up at super. This is at super middle, by the way. He then took on Bilal Akaway, who at the time was undefeated, 20 wins, no defeats and 1 draw. Knocked him out in 3 rounds. And all this string of excellent victories, where he was it's almost like a second career for John up at super middleweight. He took on Callum Smith. Now this was in 2019, and he lost a very controversial unanimous decision. Now, I still think John Ryder was a clear winner against Callum Smith. I'm sorry, but I just don't. I've watched that fight a few times. I just can't understand why anyone would give it to Smith. I just think John was craftier, busier, first to the punch. He was beating Smith to the punch. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Smith didn't win any rounds, but generally speaking, even when John was losing rounds, if you'd asked yourself the question, who would I rather be, it would have been John Ryder, not Callum Smith. So, very, very controversial. Smith at the time was undefeated, 26 wins, no draws, no defeats. But, yeah, and that was for the WBA and the WBC super middleweight titles. So, John is now 0-3 in British title fights and 0-1 in world title fights. Although the Bilal Akaway fight was for the WBA interim super middleweight title, which is actually the fight that got him the Callum Smith gig. So John then goes back to square one again. A couple of wins over modest opposition, and suddenly Danny Jacobs is brought over to Ali Pali. Great venue. If any of you have ever been there, you'll know that it's a brilliant venue to watch not just boxing but music as well. Really good. I really like Alexander Palace in Muswell Hill. And he takes on Danny Jacobs, John does, and he wins a split decision. Now, I've got to be honest here. This was, it's like 115, 113, I think 2 cards for John and then one for Danny Jacobs, but I thought Jacobs won it. I've got to be honest, I thought Jacobs won it by at least a couple of points. But John got the rub of the green. Not really fair on Jacobs, but, I just think, I think... I don't think Jacobs has fought since, and that was back in 2022. So I think that sort of knocked whatever was left out of Jacobs. He just thought, I've had enough of this. He walked off, he'd made his money. But I definitely thought he won that fight, Jacobs, no doubt about it. One fight that John definitely did win was the next match, and that was against Zach Parker, because he stopped Zach Parker in 4 rounds. Zach had a busted hand. But let's not take anything away from John. He won that fight fair and square. And that, of course, got him the bonanza against Canelo. In fact, the Zach Parker fight was John's last win, because he fought Canelo, went the distance, 12 rounds, he was over in the 5th, but somehow fought his way to the end, lost, virtually every round, but nevertheless, he went the distance with a modern-day great. And then, of course, that brings us to last Saturday, which was Jaime Munguia, and he got stopped in 9. So you could say a guy who was, in one sense, a nearly man, because he never quite got over the line with the British title, never mind the 2 world title attempts. 0-3 in British title fights, 0-2 in world title fights, but did win a couple of interim belts. The Zach Parker fight was actually for the WBO interim belt, super middle belt. So he's won 2 interim belts at super middleweight, but never the full fat flavour one. But who can take anything away from John Ryder? Good blue collar fighter, terrific fighter, gave everything. A heart of steel, you might say. Great inner metal. And John, we're going to miss you, mate. Thanks for the memories. Much respect to you. Enjoy your retirement. It is well deserved. And hang on to your money, mate, because some don't. All right. What do you think of John Ryder? Comments below. Do you like him as much as I do? Of course you do. Comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the like button and I'll catch you later. Bye for now.